People fight for their beliefs all the time, but does that mean they deserve to be killed over them? Today we're going to be talking about Reverend George Haddock's case from Sioux City. Hello and welcome to Investigating Iowa. My name is Sarah. Thank you so much for coming back this week. I'm so sorry this is a late post because I had so much other coverage going on this weekend with the cat show, which if you haven't seen that, I'll put a link to it on the screen or in the description below, but definitely check that out. Today we're going to be talking about a very messy case that happened in the 1880s to Reverend George Haddock. It's still kind of widely known around Iowa and especially Sioux City today because it was such a strange, odd case, and his killer was never convicted, but they're pretty sure that they know who the killer was. Before I get into the case, I just want to say that I mean no disrespect to any of the parties involved. This is all just information I'm finding through articles, videos, interviews, online files, and putting it together into a video for you guys to learn from. In 1882, the Clark Law was passed by Iowa voters. This pretty much was a prohibition before the prohibition in the 1900s. It prohibited any liquor sales or consumption within the state of Iowa. And most cities were pretty well following this, except for Sioux City. Sioux City officials were turning the other way and allowing people to continue selling and consuming alcohol because it was so good for their own town's economy. They had multiple different gambling establishments that allowed booze. They had over 75 different saloons in the town, and a lot of people relied on it for their income. So there was a reverend by the name of George Haddock who had come to the Sioux City area about this time, and he had just come from Wisconsin and named himself the Fighting Preacher. He fought for prohibition everywhere he went. He believed that it was destructive, that it was a horrible thing to have liquor or alcohol in establishments, and he believed, and he had even said on his pulpit multiple times, that this would lead to death. Now this is going to play in later, as you probably can put together already, but he actually went around and created kind of a committee of other religious leaders, pastors, preachers, who also believed in prohibition, and so they all were kind of collectively getting together and kind of documenting and trying to catch all these people who were doing liquor sales, subtly, and they were calling out officials for saying, this is illegal and you guys are letting this happen anyway. So now we're here in 1886. We have George Haddock, the Fighting Preacher, who has his committee of other religious leaders who are going around town documenting any illegal action around prohibition that they're seeing and trying to report it to officials who are turning the other cheek, like just not even bothering to notice or acknowledge that these illegal acts are happening. And this murder that would happen would become the turning point in Sioux City's history. On Tuesday, August 3rd, 1886, George Haddock would be walking down the street on 4th Street, and he would see that there was a beer wagon that was stopped in front of a saloon, and there were multiple people coming out and unloading this beer wagon, and he was taking note of it for his kind of group that he had created. A lot of people in Sioux City did not like George Haddock, and for obvious reasons, because he was trying to stop the illegal activity that was causing them to make money. And one of those people was Fred Lurch. He actually was watching this whole unloading of this beer cart go down, and he sees George Haddock come up, and he shows him an axe and says to him that he would cut his head off if he came any closer to the beer wagon. So that same night, George had actually been out of town with a couple of the other pastors, documenting some illegal activity happening with the Prohibition Act in another town. And they came back and they parked a buggy in the stable, and they were leaving the stable when they saw these men across the street who were looking for trouble. George realized that there was some tension, and so he grabbed a metal pulley on a rope nearby just in case he had to defend himself. And sure enough, he approaches these men and they surround him, and all of a sudden a gunshot goes off. George fell and tried to get back up before he stumbled a couple more times and fell into a gutter where he bled out and unfortunately died. A lot of people would speak out in the upcoming days. A lot of people were just stunned that this even happened, especially to a religious leader. And the governor of Iowa at that time even said that he would give a $500 reward to anybody who could lead to information, an arrest, and conviction of the murderer. Side note really quick, that $500 equates to $14,000 today. And so the governor of Iowa was willing to give $14,000 in today's money in order to solve this crime that happened on the streets of Sioux City all over Prohibition. And we're going to get into why they think it was because of Prohibition. So the timeline's a little muddy on what actually happened when, so I don't have exact dates, but there were some rumors around August 6th that they had picked up somebody and arrested somebody for the murder of George Haddock. And a lot of the newspapers were calling around to the police department, and the police department wasn't confirming anything. And again, that was before a lot of Freedom of Information Act happened, a lot of that stuff. A lot of people who witnessed the crime said that they saw John Arensdorf pull the trigger that killed George Haddock. And I really hope I'm saying that name right, but from now on I'm just going to call him John. Anyway, so John gets arrested, and there's actually 2 trials. The first one, it ended in a hung jury, and the second one, he was found not guilty. And actually later that day, he went out drinking with the jury members and took a picture with them. I'm going to show you the picture right now and circle him in that photograph. There wasn't a lot more information that was found about the trials that actually took place, because I'm trying to understand why it ended in a hung jury in the first place, or how he ended up not guilty when there were multiple witnesses that put him at the scene and say that he pulled the trigger. It was very likely that he was the murderer. Not only did people put it together that he was at the scene of the crime and that multiple people saw him pull the trigger, but because he actually went very broke when the Prohibition came into place. He had said multiple times that he had lost a lot of money due to lack of liquor sales. In 1936, a concrete marker would be made by a couple community members to document where George Haddock actually was murdered, and it was placed on that street corner. In 2014, the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino would actually lay ground in that same place that George Haddock died. First of all, there's a lot of irony to the fact that a casino was laying ground right where this pastor had died for the reasons of Prohibition. But also they realized they didn't want to get rid of this piece of history. So they cut out the concrete slab and gave it to the Sioux City Public Museum to put on display. And that's all I have about this case. I mean, there's nothing really else documented, but I know that this is a huge case that people in Sioux City know a lot about, or they talk a lot about. At least that's what I've heard. And I know a lot of people like to discuss it because it's kind of interesting that it feels like they caught the murderer, but they haven't convicted him. So we're really not sure where it all pans out. Anyway, so please comment in the comment section. I'd love to hear what you have to say, and we'll see you next week.